Then let's look at equity of the group. What do we mean by equity of the group? Now, the equity of the group, remember we have defined the group as being made up of the parent and its subsidiaries. Now, the equity of the group simply refers to the residual interest in the assets of the group after deducting the liabilities of the group. So that residual interest, if you like, you can call it ownership, but the residual interest in the assets of a group after deducting the liabilities. Now, if the parent owns all the 100% of the equity of the subsidiary, then what you find is that all the equity of the group is attributable to the owners of the parent. But if the parent owns less than 100% of the equity in the subsidiaries, then that means that there are investors other than the owners of the parent that hold the remaining equity, so that the equity of the group are attributed to owners of the parent as well as the non-controlling interest, those other investors other than the owners of the parent. Then let's define consolidated financial statements. What is consolidated financial statement? Consolidated financial statements are also known as group accounts. These are the financial statements in which the assets, the liabilities, the incomes, the expenses, the equity, and the cash flows of the parent and its subsidiaries are presented as though they are of a single economic entity. I take that again. Consolidated financial statements are the financial statements in which the assets, the liabilities, the equity, the cash flows, the incomes, and the expenses of the parent and the subsidiaries are presented as though they are of a single economic entity. Then, other important concepts include pre-acquisition retained earnings. What do we mean by pre-acquisition retained earnings? These are the retained earnings which the subsidiary had earned before the date of acquisition. All of the earnings that the subsidiary had earned leading up to the date of acquisition are what we refer to as pre-acquisition retained earnings. Then, post-acquisition retained earnings. Post-acquisition retained earnings are the earnings that a subsidiary earns after the date of acquisition. That is, those additional earnings that the subsidiary earned right from the date of acquisition up to date, they are the ones we refer to as post-acquisition retained earnings. It will do to give an illustration here. Now, the illustration you are looking at now assumes that the parent is known as P and the subsidiary is S, and the P acquired its 80% stake in S 2 years ago. At that date, the S already had retained earnings of 5 million. Today, the retained earnings of S had increased to 8 million. Now, the post-acquisition retained earnings of S, of course, will be 3 million. That is 8 million minus 5 million. Now, when we are doing the consolidated financial statement, one of the figures we have to determine is consolidated retained earnings. Now, that consolidated retained earnings, amongst others, will include the parent P's share of that 3 million. And that will be 80% of 3 million, 2.4 million. So that when computing the consolidated retained earnings, we will include 2.4 million being P's share in that 3 million post-acquisition retained earnings of S. Now, we also look at other concepts, such as non-controlling interest. Now, non-controlling interest would only arise if the stake of the parent in the subsidiary is less than 100%. If the stake of the parent is, say, 90%, then the NCI, which is the abbreviation for non-controlling interest, will be 10%. If the stake of the parent is 70%, NCI will be 30%. NCI is also one of the figures that must be calculated and included in the consolidated financial statement. How do we do that? We shall find out later. But suffice to say for now that there are two options that are allowed by IFRS 3 in measuring non-controlling interest, if it exists. We have the proportionate value basis and the fair value basis. With the proportionate value basis, NCI is proportionate to the percentage holding of NCI. For example, if NCI holds 10%, then the NCI value will be 10% of the equity of the subsidiary. If NCI is 30%, the NCI value will be 30% of the equity of the subsidiary. The second option I mentioned is fair value. With the fair value option, NCI would not usually be proportionate to the percentage stake of NCI. Rather, NCI is based on the fair values of the shares of the subsidiary at the date of acquisition. Now, for entities that are quoted in the recognized stock market, you'll find that IFRS 3 allows, in fact, states that the market price of the shares of the subsidiary as stated in that capital market shall be taken to be, it approximates to the fair value, so that the fair value of NCI will not be computed with reference to that market price of the shares of the subsidiary at that date of acquisition. Now, again, let's look at another illustration to drive home the two bases of value of measuring NCI. In this illustration, again, P represents the parent and S represents the subsidiary. P acquired a 90% stake in S on 31st March 20X5. At that date, the share price, the market price of S was N1.50 each. And at that date of acquisition, it had retained earnings, that's retained profit, of 5,000 naira. Now, the statement of financial position of both the parent, P, and S are indicated here. Now, you have the total assets of both P and S being 170,000 and 80,000 respectively, and the equity and liabilities of both, of course, the same. But one thing you will note is that there's one item you have in P which is not in S. Now, that is investment in S. That figure simply represents the value of the investment that P made in S. It will, of course, appear as an asset in the statement of financial position of